So on the last bullet there, I want to just summarize what I have strived all my life. I've strived to understand what is initiation, what was it in ancient times, what is it now, how does it differ, and why does it differ? Because it's very different now. And my source for all of this, I would say, is Rudolf Steiner and then my own experience, because it really takes a lifetime to allow what the teaching of Rudolf Steiner to permeate oneself, probably multiple lifetimes, because there's pieces of his teaching I don't touch at all. But as far as initiation goes, it's eye-opening to me what he has said about it. So with that, let's move to what I want to talk about today. Why initiation? Why pursue it? What are we looking for? And I just wrote down some bullets that come to mind in my case. And I wanted your input also, and Jean's, on what other bullets should go on this slide, because everybody has an individual relationship to initiation and different experiences, different expectations, different sequence potentially. And I did want to go back to something you said last time we met. I have not said there is no more Akashic records. I just said there is no more, we don't each carry the world karma since the time of Christ. The world karma was taken off our shoulders. And that's what it means to be forgiven of the original sin that we say in Christianity. We each need to cleanse our own karma, though. And that is still in effect. It's just that you don't have to go back 7 generations or whatever many were on the shoulders of the ancients. So I don't know, do people associate initiation with out-of-body experiences? One of the things that differs between ancient and modern is that in modern initiation, you do not seek an out-of-body experience. What you seek is to go within and understand your etheric body and how it regulates your physical. And that's a big difference, right? Because with out-of-body, in antiquity, my understanding is that they really sought to find the divine behind the phenomena. So the constellations have divine powers in them. What are they? How do they interact? All of that ends up in mythology, right? And then later in Greece, you have the Eleusinian mysteries of Demeter and Persephone and Dionysus. And those have to do with understanding the spirit in nature, So you went from constellations, understanding what they are, planets, and the understanding of the planets is best expressed in the ancient Greek gods. I would say that would be the best record of what is the divine at the planetary level. And then nature, in fairy tale, you hear about gnomes and salamanders and undines and sylphs. All of these are nature spirits that are little helpers in nature, and in antiquity, people could grow their clairvoyance to see them. But the bigger mystery of the cycle of the year and vegetation and all of that, that's what you were brought to see in the ancient Eleusinian mysteries of Demeter. So in antiquity, it was a search to find the divine outside the self, in the cosmos and in the nature that surrounds us. Today, it's more to open up a space inside us to host the divine in our etheric being. And that's a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a long time to differentiate the two because I kept asking myself, I don't have all these powers, to see the astral world. I don't. I might here and there, but I'm not a clairvoyant that way. But I am a clairvoyant in terms of being able to see my inner etheric body.
Mm-hmm.
And different religions or different brotherhoods or different systems, mystical systems, have different goals, right? So I was trying to kind of be more all encompassing in terms of, okay, how do you round it all up?
And I've always kind of learned, or it might be part of my belief system, that I've been programmed to believe that not everyone has the same gifts, that different gifts for different people. So some of these bullets might apply to me and others might not, based upon what gifts, I don't know. I mean, I guess there's also part of my belief system that everyone can do all of these things, at the right, I guess, progression of their ascension. And I guess in this particular lifetime, it might be, what gifts do you have in this lifetime?
Well, it's also a result of what you have accomplished in previous lifetimes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a big difference if somebody was an initiate in antiquity, treading this path now, and if somebody was not. I would say that is the biggest difference.
Okay.
And I will, towards the end of this presentation, talk more about that because Christ came for all the people who were not initiates and to provide a path for that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
a very different path than what we have been discussing so far. Not very different. It just you come into it a different way.
Mm-hmm.
I think the common thread is how to relink to the divine, right?
Yeah.
So that you can be conscious of the divine.
Yeah.
And in antiquity, it was the divine outside you. And today, it is the divine within you. And that's a big difference.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting.
So, Rudolf Steiner always talks about our three functions of will, thought, and feeling. And a lot of what he teaches is how to keep them in balance. Don't let one override the others, because it's like having a tripod. And if one leg is longer than the others, the tripod, you can put nothing on it, it will all slip off.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And a lot of his teaching is how to balance three at all times. However, I believe that initiation paths tend to be one more than another. So there is a path of will, which is the heroic path in antiquity. Also the path in Chinese philosophy of esoteric martial arts and how you rise to control your mind. And that takes you from the first path to the second path, right? Because they claim that energy goes where the mind goes. Well, when you enter that level, you are working with the thought path. And then Christianity comes and opens up the third path of feeling. Now, ancient initiation recognized the third path as a goal almost. It was the goal of becoming an initiate was to become a beloved. And you see that in early Christianity, the fathers of the church would address each other as mega eresti, which means great beloved. And you see it in the Platonic tradition, where is all of these references to eros, but it's not necessarily physical. It's all these the followers of Socrates who love Socrates and his teachings, right? So there is a love bond there. And of course, in modern translations, we think of it all as sexual, but it's not. It's a way of cultivating that path of feeling, which becomes more and more important with the advent of Christ. So in the path of will, it's the center phase where you want to get out of your animal brain and into controlling, control it through courage, right? Oh, I'm not going to be afraid. I will not capitulate. I will rise as a hero. I will get out of being a victim into being a hero. And you have the heroic path of the sun hero that so much of mythology is based on in all countries. I shouldn't say countries, in all civilizations. So the trick there is not to be driven by the animal mind. It's not that you don't use it, but you use it to discern, not to judge. Because the minute you judge, you fall prisoner of that opinion. You need to discern and stand back and then try and understand why things are a given way. Interesting thing on the path of thought, it's that to me, to know oneself is not so much about knowledge. And it took me years of studying Plato to come to this conclusion. It is more to understand that reason is like a vicious circle that unless you are able to grasp all perspectives, you cannot reach truth. And maybe reaching your truth should be another one of our objectives for initiation. I will add that because I think deep down that desire we have is a desire for truth more than a desire for God or a desire for anything else.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation with one of my neighbors yesterday, and he was saying, do you think there's one truth, or is it, does each individual have their own truth? And I said, well, I think there's one truth and everything else is perception. And that everyone has a different perception of what the truth is.
Yeah, I agree. In the lower self, that's the case, right? In the upper self, I think we will need to go through a lot of discussion to determine whether it differs or not. But one brave thought I had, and I'm proposing this here, is that the path of thought is a path that leads one to complete oneself by knowing all the perspectives or by learning all the perspectives. And I think that's what Socrates was teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Because you read the Platonic dialogues, they're frustrating because none of them arrives to a conclusion. So you examine what is courage, you examine what is virtue, you examine, can virtue be taught? And the dialogue takes you round and round and examines all possibilities, but doesn't say that's the right one.
Yeah.
It leaves you hanging. And I think that was a necessary preparation step for one to even be accepted in a mystical school, that you learn to have that mindset
Mm-hmm.
where you look at all the perspectives. And then in ancient language, to know someone could mean to be engaged with someone in a marriage type of situation. So Abraham knew his wife Sarah, right?
Mm-hmm.
It means to become all encompassing, two people in one marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And because you have this concept of the sacred matrimony that comes out of the Greek tradition of Hieros Gamos, or mystical wedding later on in medieval times, I am more and more inclined to think that knowing oneself means coming to that point where you combine your masculine and feminine into one. So your lower self is in dialogue with the upper. Here's the train.
Okay.
But I leave that there as an open possibility for now. And then the last is, how do you rise through agape? And I told you that agape in Greek means to lead upwards, right? So that's the ascent of that etheric Jacob's ladder through the path of feeling and moral compass. And in Greek Christianity, the notion of the Virgin Sophia is very prevalent. And in Constantinople, the Orthodox Church was headed out of the Virgin Sophia, the Temple of the Virgin Sophia, which really takes an ancient concept of you rise into Sophia, meaning wisdom. And when you enter there, it's like a new birth, and this is a virgin birth. And that's why it's called Virgin Sophia, which in all of my diagrams maps to the fifth chakra. When you awaken the fifth chakra, you are in communication with the Virgin Sophia. So I sat down and thought, okay, what if I were to look at initiation across denominations, what would you say are the major phases? So the first one is that of individuation. You need to develop ego consciousness in order to become an initiate. You cannot become an initiate when you are part of a group thinking that depends on your religion or depends on your family or your race, on your nation. All of that pulls you away from having your own ego consciousness through which you can ascend. And individuation involves moving out of animal into human consciousness. We talked about moving out of Kabbalah into presence. And you basically subdue the moral instincts of fear and predator activity, and you turn yourself to a discipline of morality and law. In antiquity, they portrayed that as the center who is the teacher of the sun hero. So all the sun heroes receive instruction from centers who are half animal, half human. So once you succeed in individuation, you have a phase of awakening. And the awakening to me means I know that deep inside I am spirit, I am eternal, and I only wear my body. I am not my body. What is inside my skin is a physical individuation, but it's there to inspire me to a spiritual individuation. And you reach that understanding through a near-death coma that in antiquity lasted for many hours, where your etheric, Steiner explains that when you fall asleep, your physical and etheric bodies remain together. So the etheric body governs all the functions of the physical while you're sleeping, including healing. The astral and the soul or ego pull out into the astral world, and that's why you have dreams and whatever inspiration comes back when you wake up. The idea for initiation was, how do you also pull the etheric body away enough so the initiate can understand their connection to the etheric spirit rather than the physical, or as well as the physical. The next phase is enlightenment, and that means gaining clairvoyance into the invisible domain. And I put that very generically because everybody's clairvoyancy differs. And I think that becomes a problem when candidates for initiation look across and they begin to feel, oh, I don't have that gift or I don't have the other gift, right? Accept that it differs. And what that clairvoyance in antiquity was into the astral. Today, it's becoming more into the etheric, where you find the Virgin Sophia, the Holy Spirit, the Christ, whatever comes with that tradition. Steiner explains that ancient mysteries, especially the northern ones in Ireland, or the Druid mysteries, they would experience Christ in the etheric. And that was before Christ ever became a physical persona on earth as the Sun Spirit. So the building a soul vessel, which is the etheric self, is really the venue to that path today. And then I call the last one apotheosis. It's really, how do you embody the divine, and you allow it to act through you as a healer of yourself or of others. And then how do you return to the divine in the end, right? So the symbol of center for individuation, night for awakening, night is a person who is serving, right? He becomes not only he serves, but he tames the horse to ride it. So it shows what needs to happen in the awakening period. Enlightenment is the Mason. And if you want to think of its connection with brotherhood, that is the point at which you join a mystical school in order to become enlightened in the past, not today, right? So in the past, you would have to join a mystical school in order to gain occult knowledge and to learn to think in terms that are not concerned with the immediate physical, but the divine that works behind it. Later on, that became brotherhoods. The problem with brotherhoods is that one requirement for one to enter a mystical school is that you are not aligned to any fundamental school of thought. So you don't come to it as a Buddhist, you don't come to it as a Christian, you don't come to it as a Muslim or an atheist or whatever. You come to it as someone who can look across all religions and appreciate what each of them offers without being part and partial of any of them. The minute, and the risk of the brotherhood is then it tries to make you be a component part of that brotherhood, and you become a fundamentalist through that. And that's a flaw, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So enlightenment requires that you're not attached to any venue of thought, but you allow them to combine and mature through you by raising your intellect to understand the invisible domain better, right? So anyways, that's why, and then in the Middle Ages, all these brotherhoods and guilds were kind of interrelated. So it was a secret knowledge, how to build a boat, how to build a cathedral. All of these guilds became secret brotherhoods that protected their particular knowledge. I use it more to say the Mason builds the soul vessel, and that's the phase in which you do that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be concerned about the physical guilds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the arc mariner learns to navigate that soul vessel in the other realm and the person themselves back to the celestial home. So the process of individuation, first of all, needs to raise us out of Malkut. And that was the sun hero path in antiquity. And with Christianity, and we covered that in our other round of webinars, in Christianity, Christ provides that, provides the path out. He doesn't take people out of Malkut. They still must make the decision to move up, but he opens up the path all the way to the third chakra, which at that time became coined as the Solar Plexus.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you still must make your individual decision to get out of victimhood, to get out of only believing in the physical.
Mm-hmm.
So when you come out of Malkut, where are you? You're in the first chakra, which really recognizes oneself as part of a race, part of a religion, part of a family, and you need to break that. You need to be who you are in your first name, not your family name and nationality and all the rest. And that's where the water baptism becomes a symbol of how do I get out of just living in my first chakra. By you get a first name in your baptism, which is your identity, your responsibility. And through that, you are able to harness your animal instincts, to harness yourself, and move into the third chakra with education and science and all that the third chakra offers. But the third chakra is very much relationship to the physical, understanding the physical. And for me, it became very obvious one day that I recognized that had walls. There were all these walls around the perception of the physical. And I felt like I needed to bust these walls. And that's when you enter the occult and you begin looking at different ways of how does the cosmic affect the physical that you sense around you. And rising out of third chakra is the hardest thing to do. And in that bullet where I say, realize that God may not be found in the third chakra, maybe I should say God, or I should say truth, because for me, I was looking for truth rather than God. I have a very hard time answering what God means, right? But what is the divine truth? That's what I was trying to bust out of.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's hard to get out of third chakra, it feels a very secure base. Science has achieved a lot, but it has taken us a long way in terms of using antibiotics to heal bacterial infections or whatever, using nuclear power for energy. But it has the counter of that too, right? Because you can use nuclear power for wars, and too many antibiotics make you susceptible to other problems. So it is a secure realm until that gets shaken up.
Mm-hmm.
And when it gets shaken up, it's hard for people to leave it because they cannot land somewhere else that is as secure or as evident or as, I don't know, that feels like a home. And the reason for that is that as we go through life and we accumulate all these experiences, so many of them painful, we put bricks in our hard wall, so we cannot go through the fourth. The fourth becomes a very painful place to be. And that's the point where a neophyte says, okay, I'll go to mystery school and learn from a high priest occult knowledge. Because there was a feeling that knowledge extended beyond the third chakra, but what was it? And you had to go to a place to find it. And these places, I don't know, I mean, maybe they exist still today, but they're more each person's theory of what is astrology, what is the tarot, all of that. It's not mystical anymore. It's more what was developed through individual journeyman of that occult art or science. Or you would go to an ashram or a monastery and they have their rituals, but do they have enlightened people there, or is it just an imitation of an old ritual that you remember and memorize and repeat again and again? I don't know. Probably a combination of the two.
Mm-hmm.
So I put this here just to remind people what it means to get out of the Kabbalah and how the path to the third chakra, that yellow light center, is opened up by Christ. But you have to assume responsibility on your own and move over to consciousness. Come out of the intellectualism into consciousness, and they're very different things.
Mm-hmm.
And here, the harnessing of the second, because the second is what? It's combination of personal desire in the front, and that's where all the sexual organs are,
Mm-hmm.
and cosmic discipline in the back, which is where your kidneys and adrenals are, right? And how do you harness the second? Through the fifth. So it's almost like a leap that you make from the third to the fifth, and from there harness a balance between desire and discipline in the second. And when you leap up to the fifth, what have you done? You have restored the Adam apple that got swallowed way back in Lemurian times, meaning consciousness descended, left the fifth, and descended to the third, the our digestive area. And that's what caused our separation between mundane and divine.
So when the Adam's apple is restored, which is the fifth chakra, is
Mhm.
that evidenced by being able to speak your truth? How would you describe the restoration of the fifth chakra?
For me, it was a very vivid experience of feeling that energy in the Adam's apple. And I told you earlier, I felt like this anole lizard that can inflate that pink
Yeah.
bubble,
Uh-huh.
except it's a blue bubble, but it feels like something that you can strengthen or let it go back to sleep or strengthen. And the way you strengthen it is by applying self-discipline. So a lot of the old rituals of Lent and be only a vegetarian, or, whatever the discipline was, it wasn't so much because being a vegetarian is better than eating meat. It was because disciplining yourself to be a vegetarian awakens the fifth chakra.
Mm.
Right? So discipline awakens it.
So it's the act of discipline, regardless of what the act is. It's the act of disciplining yourself in some manner that awakes.
That matters, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, instead people become fanatic about being vegan or this or that or the other, and that's not the case. I mean, again, discernment, not judgment, and don't be a fundamentalist on anything,
Mm-hmm.
because everything in the cosmos is both good and bad, and what makes a difference is how you use it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I mean, you were talking about nicotine and how it helps against COVID, right? There's an
Yeah.
example. Does that make nicotine a good thing? No, in that case, it makes it a good thing in that use.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what matters in all of this is that you learn to discipline yourself. You become the charioteer of your ruly and unruly horse. That's how Plato puts it in the Timaeus. And that's building soul, right? The charioteer is our consciousness soul.
Mm-hmm.
And then here I put next to them the different trials. Water trial, earth trial, air trial, fire trial. In antiquity, they were called trials. Today, you would call them baptism. And if you translate baptism to mean transmutation, you understand its meaning in English. You know, because when I mention the word baptism, you usually have people act like, oh, this Judeo-Christian, and again, I'm not coming to it from a fundamentalist perspective at all. It's just how it falls here. And then you can relate that slide to the ascent. You know, you need to go out of the Kabbalah into intellectual soul through the earth trial. That's what antiquity did by having you in this near-death condition for several hours. And then Christ takes that on for all of humanity, so you don't have to do the near death, places us in an intellectual soul, solar plexus presence. But now we need to get out of that prison, right? So how do we do that? It takes a long time because you can fall back in that prison at any moment, right? I don't know. I mean, the difference between using pharmaceuticals and homeopathic medicine is, you know, if you are in the solar plexus prison, you use pharmaceuticals. You bust out by trying out homeopathic, which are not as miraculously obvious the minute you pop a pill, but in the long term, they make you a lot healthier because they teach your body to preserve itself rather than hush up the symptom the way the pharmaceuticals do. But it's very hard to exit the mental prison of the pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'll tell you a little anecdote here. I went through this sinus infection that everybody is getting these days. I caught it from my daughter-in-law, who is still coughing herself to death. Well, I keep telling them, don't use all of these NyQuil and symptom suppressants, because what happens is they become this long-lasting cough for months afterwards that it's impossible to get rid of. And in using just homeopathic remedies, yeah, they quieten the symptoms. They make the disease go through you faster. But this time I experienced something very interesting, which was it was keeping the disease outside my doorstep. So I would feel all these symptoms of cold feet, cold head. Oh, maybe I'm getting a sinus headache, but it was always at that level, never entered and made me sick to have to take bigger measures. It took forever because this virus lives forever. It lives for 3 weeks, I think. But if I were to say what it felt like, it was always at my doorstep, knocking on my door and my windows, but not being able to get in. So, but it takes a lot for one to get there, right? It almost takes failing with a third chakra systems and having to move to fifth chakra systems. And then you move. So that is the water baptism, taking responsibility of yourself, and then accepting the cosmos as it is, rather than trying to fix it, is what moves you to second presence. Accepting that everything you encounter is a teacher to you. And if it bothers you, there is a lesson there. So dive in and understand what is the lesson. And that I call in one word forgiveness here, letting go. It moves us to second presence. And notice that as you move up each presence, you are harnessing or taming each of the balancers, meaning the levels that are dual, which is the second, fourth, and sixth chakra.
Mm-hmm.
And then the serving as a healer moves you to third presence, but you can fall at any time. The minute you use a feeling that moves in the downward direction, like fear or grief or anger, you pop down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So learning to harness all of that is also very important.
Mm-hmm.
So the next thing I did was try to see, okay, in ancient Greek tradition, what are these phases called and what do they contain? So the first phase is accomplished through ritual. You have not entered a mystical school yet. You just attend your church or whatever the festivals are that your community abides with. And that they call teleti. Teleti means ritual. And we have these words from people who interpreted Plato's writings, and the terms survived. So in ritual, you are in attendance, but you have a serving mindset, right? And a revering mindset. And what needs to happen there is cleansing, and then that mystical wedding awakening. And I will talk later a little bit more about how Greek drama festivals got you through that, because that's a ritual that is open to us. Most of what the mystical schools did is not. The second phase is meesis, which means initiation, to enter within. And that you had to do through a mystery school. And the first step there was gain occult knowledge in one or more fields. So astrology was a field, tarot was a field, mythology was a field, actually. And then what that prepared you was to create the host for the divine inside yourself. And then the last phase, they called it epoptia, which means oversight. The person who is on the tallest tower that can look around all the vicinity, that's an epoptis. So it's the ability to rise and see the horizon around you by being in that third presence. And there in Christianity, we have that as resurrection in spirit and then ascension. What you have in antiquity is that the sun hero is posted in the sidereal sky as the constellation of Hercules or Orion or whatever different constellations they wrote in the sky. And those are not physical constellations the way they would be recognized by astronomers today. They are more a connection of star dots to depict the hero, right? So it's literally writing on the sky because those connections are inspired by the initiates of the day. So in this third one is where before Christ you would experience it as an out-of-body experience, the initiate would, but that's no longer the case. In our time, you go within, you go into your etheric and ascend that ladder the way I was showing it in the previous picture. So that's a big difference.
Yeah.
And that's why, because one of the things I'm trying to understand as I study Steiner deeper and deeper is why does he say that initiation differs today and the yoga path is no longer the path? Why? Because the yoga path takes you to an astral experience, and what we need is an etheric experience. So I think the astral experience is part of us already. So it doesn't need the emphasis that the etheric does. That's how I read it. It's not that one is wrong and the other is right. It's what is the next step?
Okay.
And if you remember when I talk, um, when I let me when I talk about what we have to transmute, you transmute the astral first, and that is done catharsis. And then you transmute the etheric, and that's where initiates of our time should be at. And then last, you transmute the physical, and that's in our future. So to look at catharsis a little deeper, it really is the self-discipline I talked about that you do from the fifth to the second. You balance your desire with discipline. And ancient Athens took people through all of these round of tragedy and satire and comedy in that wheel I have shown, where you go from hubris through sparagmos, which means to be eaten alive, to metanoia, which is the change of mind or forgiveness, up to catharsis, and how that can be a vicious circle as long as you're operating with what lies outside yourself, and can only become a transmutation circle if you go within. And it culminates if you achieve catharsis in that circle, you culminate with the Hieros Gamos, which is the mystical wedding. And I've asked myself for a long time, what is comedy? Why comedy? Why does comedy bring you to that cathartic point? And then I realized, what do you do in comedy? You laugh at yourself. And what does it take to do that? It takes rising above yourself to look down and laugh at yourself, right? So, I swear, I tried to answer this in a thesis in college 50 years ago, and I'm only now arriving to that insight. But I don't know, some people have an easier time. But this is the cycle I was talking about, where you have, and I should probably go back to this slide and write next to the eastern part is hubris, at the bottom is paragmos, in the west is metanoia, and at the top is catharsis. I should put those words back in here.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, how do you transmute? By taking the way you want to react to the outside world and turning it in. So pride, if you're reacting with pride, which is hubris, and that's the downfall of every hero, take that in and make it reverence. When you feel proud of yourself, think again and become reverent of your teachers around you, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you transmute grief? You bring it in. Instead of grieving about everything you lost out there, come within and look at what you gained from what you lost, right? And be thankful for that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole idea behind the Christian Mass, where Christ is not asking us to remember him in grief. He's asking us to remember him in the Eucharist, which means thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
So remember him with gratitude. Don't go into the grief of the passion. And then so that would be the first quadrant is the romantic, where we get to be so proud. The second is the tragic, where we get to experience our downfall and its grief. The third is the satiric, where we believe in nothing and trust nothing. And that's filled with fear. And again, how do you transmute fear? You turn it into trust. Trust that what is happening is what needs to be happening. And see how you fare in that. And then the last is the comic, the last quadrant, where you transmute anger to forgiveness by laughing at yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I talked about this earlier. I talked about how my suspicion is that to know oneself means to know both sides of who you are, in the human and the divine, in the masculine and the feminine, and how today we refer to that in the Eastern um, tradition of energy work and meridians. And it is the microcosmic orbit that we can create if we manage the circulation of our spinal energy to be an ascending male and a descending female channel. So if this is not a very good depiction of a human being, but it's my best try at it. If you think about what happens, the way in which those channels work is either they both go up or they both come down in a human being. And what you need to do is make them be circular. And that you do that by touching your tongue to the upper part of the mouth, because that's where the governing vessel turns into the conceptual vessel. And then you do it by pressing together your saddle point, because that's the beginning of both channels. So if you connect them that way and you do this microcosmic orbit, you're doing that sacred matrimony between your upper and lower, between your masculine and feminine. And it's a requirement when you do any healing art, and something they teach you to do for Reiki, for example, to create that Hara line. It's called the circular channel of the Hara line. And when you do that, then you can have healing energy come out of your hands. So actually, when I realized that, studying the meridians, I began to look, and you can even see it in a movie. When a man approaches a woman and they kiss, you can almost see that rotation, but it happens through two people, right? The masculine raises the energy, the feminine brings it down. And when the two people unite physically, you momentarily create this hara line. And the same with sex, right? It does that at the other end. So you can train yourself to see that energy happen. I don't know. I mean, in some cases, it's more obvious than others, and a lot of it has to do with the connection of the two people. Is it for real or is it pretend, right?
Mhm.
But this is why it takes two people to have that blissful feeling in physical life, because each of them has a different direction of energy, and on their own, they don't feel complete. But an initiate gets to the point where they can create this microcosmic orbit and feel complete.
Mm.